Sorry, my name's Miri, comes up as West Berks Can, but I'm the founder of West Berks Climate Action Network. So as part of the Climate Action Network activities, we set up community schemes to help people lower their carbon footprint. And so one of the schemes is this Warmer Streets scheme, where we contacted all of the companies in the West Berks area who are accredited by the government to be part of the Green Home scheme. It's not many companies, it's only 2. And one of them wanted to engage with us on this scheme and provide a further discount to people in the area, so that we could, push it out to more people. So that's Ed Andrews from Instagroup and his colleague Colin from Instagroup as well. So thanks to them, we're able to make best use of the Green Homes grant and get an extra discount on top of that. And so that's what we're here this evening, for them to go through the details of how the Green Home scheme works, but also how the Warmer Streets aspect of it will lead to an additional discount, making home insulation cheaper for all of us. So the Green Homes grant covers many different types of energy improvements to your home. The Warmer Streets scheme only covers the cavity wall insulation and the loft insulation aspects. But I'm sure that Ed will be happy to answer questions on any other aspects of the Green Homes grant as well. So a bit of housekeeping first. Ed will be sharing slides to explain what he'll be going through. So others of us might want to turn our screens off, turn our videos off, so that we're not using up too much bandwidth. And keep yourselves muted while Ed is talking, so that there's not too much background noise. The video will be recorded so that people can view afterwards. There will be a link to YouTube, and it is also currently being live streamed to Facebook. If you do want to ask a question, then feel free to ask while Ed is talking, but we would ask that those questions are asked in the chat, so that Ed can then answer them, or myself can answer them afterwards. If you want to ask any questions anonymously, you can do so by emailing in to westberkscan@gmail.com. Or if you're happy to have your name attached to the question, then after Ed has presented the material, you can unmute yourself, put your video back on, and feel free to ask away or ask in the chat during or after Ed's talk. So are there any questions on sort of the logistics and housekeeping aspects? All right, so with that, I will hand over to Ed to present.
Cool. Okay, thank you, Marion. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen in a second. Is that right? Yeah, got nods. Okay, cool. Great stuff. So good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining this evening. And also thanks Miriam and her team for setting this up. My name's Ed Andrews, and I'm the Partnership Manager at Instagroup. I'll have a quick kind of introduction to Instagroup and who we are, what we do, and then I'll go on to discuss a bit more about the government's Green Home grant scheme, talk a bit about the process and how Instagroup can help and support you guys through the journey through the Warmer Streets project. So who are Instagroup? So we're based in Finch Hampstead, near Wokingham, and have just entered our 40th year of trading. We install a wide range of energy efficiency products into mainly residential homes. However, we also do some commercial buildings as well. We've been working on almost every energy efficiency and fuel poor prevention scheme for the last probably about 30 years. And over that time, we built up a great relationship with the local community and particularly with the government. We actually had Alok Sharma at our offices to discuss this scheme and help us with cavity wall installation. And so the core kind of services which we offer are mainly around loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, and a bit of solid wall insulation as well. We do have a heating division, but that's not really involved in the warmer streets scheme. And we have our own approved products, or insulation products, which we actually
What do we have? Cavity wall?
Sorry? Is that a question? Okay, no.
Sorry, I think there was a question to a nearby person.
Right, not on me. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
You know, I was just saying that we do have a network of installers across the country, and we distribute our products to them, and they're also kind of independent SMEs with a strong local presence in their community. However, with the Warmer Streets project, our in-house division will be delivering all the surveys and installations. We've also got Colin on the call today. He's our head of surveying, and he'll probably step in a bit later on to talk about the surveying process and help me answer any questions as well. And then finally, it's probably just worth mentioning, we do have our own, well, as we have our own approved products, we have quite a strict onboarding process for any installers wanting to use them and install them in people's homes. So therefore, our tech team do quite a lot of on-site audits and quality checks, and they can attend to a lot of technical customer queries as well. Okay, so enough about Instagroup. Let's talk about why we're all here this evening. So the Green Homes Grant Scheme. This scheme is set up to enable homeowners or residential landlords to access vouchers to help support the cost towards energy efficiency improvements. There's been £2 billion put into this fund in the form of vouchers. The scheme opened, it actually opened at the end of September, and the applications close at the end of March next year. And how it works is the government have said that the vouchers will cover 2/3 of the cost of the eligible improvements, up to a maximum government contribution of £5,000. To kind of put that in a bit more clearer terms, as an example, for instance, if you were to have loft and cavity wall insulation together worth, say, £2,100, the government will contribute 2/3, so £1,300, leaving the customer contribution as £700. So that's kind of like the basics. So you're looking to you have to contribute the third amount of the invoice cost. There is another stream as well. If you're in receipt of any benefits or in a low income household, then you'll be able to access a voucher worth £10,000. And with that, there's no contribution necessary. I can share a list of the eligible benefits potentially after this presentation. However, Colin and his team will go through all this on site with you guys during the survey. And in terms of the measures, I mean, there are, well, like most government schemes, they tend to be a little bit more confusing than they need to be. There is a list of primary measures which you'll need in order to access the secondary measures. But as Miriam said, this scheme is really kind of focusing on loft and cavity wall insulation. If there are many people with solid walls that need insulating, we can definitely try and help with that, whether that's in the scheme or without the scheme. So, you know, we can cover that as well. Yeah, and then the application for the actual voucher itself is done through a government website. You'll need a quote from us. You'll then need to sort of select the product you want installing, answer a couple of simple questions, select Instagroup as the installer, and then click apply. We can actually obviously help you guys through the application process on phone or even in person on the day, so you don't need to worry too much about that. And I think it's probably just worth mentioning just a bit about timescales, because the government, even though they opened the scheme at the end of September, they've said that they're not going to start issuing vouchers until early November. So we were kind of expecting them to sort of get the scheme running and going a bit quicker than they have done. So us having this conversation now is actually quite good timing. So, you know, there's not a huge rush to get, you know, applications done, and we can take our time through it. So a little bit more about the actual Warmer Streets programme and how it's going to work. It's probably worth mentioning that we have agreed a discount rate for loft and cavity wall insulation jobs which come through the scheme. We're also working with the West Berkshire Cans Group in order to build up a bit of a donation fund, which will then be used to improve the energy efficiency of a selected public building, maybe a town hall, community building or school, something along those lines, in order to kind of, you know, leave our trace there in the local community. And in terms of installation costs, it's always quite tricky to give estimate figures or give you guys any kind of accurate figures, because generally it's done on a meter rate, whether it's cavity wall installation or loft installation. It's all done on the size of your property rather than the actual type of property. But I have put together a slight kind of slide here just to kind of give you an estimate of what you might be looking at for cavity wall and loft installation. So you can see the different property types here. There's an estimation on the meterage size of the walls, and then the cavity wall installation cost. And again, lofts are always the tricky one to give estimated costs, because actually, even if you're in a, you know, 3 or 4 bed detached house, you might not necessarily have as much, you know, insulatable space in the loft as a, you know, an end terrace potentially. But just kind of giving you guys a bit of an idea. But again, we can kind of go through all this a little bit more detail during the survey stage. It's probably worth mentioning as well that the different kind of savings which we're expecting from these types of measures. So you can see on the screen, there's a slide for, sorry, there's a graph for loft installation savings. This is an annual savings taken from the Energy Saving Trust websites. They can sometimes be slightly conservative, but, you know, it's to give you guys a bit of an idea. And again, for the cavity wall installation savings, that's an annual saving as well. And so in terms of, yeah, so that's kind of like typical costs and savings. In terms of the actual surveys and the sort of the application, I might just ask Colin just to kind of maybe chat a little bit about the process of surveys and what the guys are expected to kind of have on site, if that's okay, Colin.
Yeah, no problem at all. So obviously the first part of the process is a call into the group. During that call, we will obtain as much information as we can against the property. So property type, how long you lived in the house, roughly how old the house is, and as Ed said, whether anybody within the household is in receipt of any form of benefit that may qualify for the higher value voucher of £10,000. Once we've agreed a date to visit the house, we will obviously come through and first of all, obviously with COVID, we need to be fully compliant with our health and safety policy. So all the surveyors will wear a mask, they will wear gloves, they will have hand sanitizer with them. And when we look at loft insulation, we will ask the homeowner to basically give us clear walkways through the house. So we would ask for the door to be open, a clear walkway to the loft space area with the ladder down if there is a ladder, hatch open, so we can quickly come in, enter the loft space, do what we need to do, and be out as quickly as we can with minimal contact with the homeowner at that point. In terms of the cavity wall insulation survey, that's what mainly done externally. There is the need for some drilling to be done. So every wall that we are looking to insulate, we will need to test drill a hole in that wall and put a camera inside the cavity to ensure that the cavity is clear of insulation and clear of obstruction, so that when the insulation is injected, it can freely flow across the cavity area. Obviously, once we've done our test holes, all the holes are made watertight with the use of silicone. Once we've done the measurements and we've taken the required photographs to satisfy the grant scheme, we will then produce the quotation, normally done on site at the end of the process of the survey. The quotation, as Ed has said, is then submitted to the government portal for your grant application. And hopefully within a few days, you would then get notification that you've been successful once the scheme is fully operational in early November. But very straightforward in terms of surveying. You contact us, we'll arrange a convenient date for us to come and see you. We'll come to you. We'll be with you probably, if we're doing cavity and loft at the same time, we'll probably be with you for about an hour at the most. Quotation will be left with you, and then we can help you go through the grant application, as Ed has said, if that's required.
Great, thanks, Colin. That's really helpful. Yeah, and so just kind of following on from Colin there. Once you have the quotation from ourselves, then the application to the voucher, it can be done by yourselves. It's very simple on the government website, or we can obviously help you guys through it and make sure it's done correctly. And then, to be honest, we're playing a bit of a waiting game for when the vouchers are looking to come through, because we can't obviously do any installations or anything until they've been approved. So we've been told early November, but we're kind of keeping an eye on it. We are trying to lobby it to get the scheme started. But yeah, as soon as you get the voucher, we'll probably get notification as well, because you've selected us as the installer. Then we'll come back in contact with you guys and sort of agree a suitable dates for the installation to take place. Generally, both the loft and cavity can be done in one day. They're slightly different teams; they can work together. Or if you just want one of the measures, then it's usually a couple of hours really. So it's quite quick, and all of our teams are very good at keeping the area very tidy and making sure that they leave the property as in as good a state as they arrived, and trying to be as unintrusive as possible. Particularly around the cavity wall installation, it can be quite noisy. So some of the neighbours sort of can be peering out the windows and things. But we'll try and always be very, very quick when we're doing our work as well. And I guess it's worth just mentioning at the end of the journey, we'll need to have a couple of documents to evidence that we have, first of all, done the installation and that you're happy with the work that's been carried out. We'll then need to submit those pieces of evidence to the scheme administrator, and at that point they will then review all the evidence, and then they'll redeem the voucher, and the payment from the government should come directly to us, and and the contribution, the third, the amount that you guys need to pay, we'll invoice you guys directly. So so hopefully it should be quite a tidy process. And I think I'll be able to give you a bit more detail of the exact specifics in terms of the evidence once we understand a little bit more about the final stage of the process, once it's been announced by the government. It's probably just worth mentioning that both loft and cavity have insurance-backed guarantees attached to them, and we have the appropriate workmanship warranties as well. And as we are, like I said, we have our own products, so our tech team will also they'll do their own kind of quality checks to make sure it's all in order. And yeah, that's kind of all I had to kind of go through, just kind of give you guys, set the scene a little bit, and be happy to take any questions on any of that or any other parts of the scheme that you need talking to.
All right, thank you very much, Ed and Colin, very useful. So we've got some questions coming in on the chat. So we've got first question is the loft insulation just the kind that lies between the joists, or is it the kind that is sprayed on the underside of the roof tiles?
Well, we would generally just have the one that's laid down. It's like a quilt roll that's laid down at the joists rather than the spray foam.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to interject. What we have to remember is every system that we install has to be accredited. So spray foaming the rafters in a loft space is not an accredited system and should not be covered under the scheme. General loft quilt, as Ed is referred to, is an accredited system and can be covered under the scheme.
All right, thank you very much. Does it matter if already there is some loft insulation in place?
Yes, it can do, depending on the depth of the existing insulation. This scheme does allow for top-ups. So I think Colin might be able to check me, but I think it needs to be between 270 and 300 mils. Generally, we come across quite a lot of properties which only have about 100 mil at the property. So we can then obviously do the relevant top up to make it compliant with building regs.
Okay,
Yeah, that's correct. So building regulation is 270 mil of loft depth. What we will find in most properties on an average is about 100 mil is currently in place. So we'll toppen up to probably a 300 mil depth once we've finished our installs.
all right, thank you very much. The next question is, any idea what proportion of dwellings have some insulation but not the optimum amount?
Lots. Lots and lots and lots. Probably, to be honest with you, we're probably going to 60, no, more than 70% of houses do not have, particularly in the loft, not the right level of insulation. So it's a large proportion still, which surprises me considering loft insulation has been pushed quite heavily for many, many years.
There's a question about if the loft is already boarded, what can you do? So if it's boarded but with insufficient insulation.
So the process there is that the existing boarding will need to be lifted and the joists will need to be raised because joist depth is about 100 mil in most lofts. Okay, so we would have to raise the joist to accommodate the 300 mil of new, up to 300 mil of the new insulation, so that we can then relay the boards on top of the new insulation, so we're not squashing it down. Obviously, the insulation becomes ineffective if you squash it. So the process is to lift the boarding, raise the joists, lay the 300 mil of insulation, and then relay the boarding on top of the new insulation without squashing it.
All right. All right. What about the cavity wall insulation? So there's a question: is what if your walls don't have cavities? They're in a very old cottage, but the walls need insulation.
Yeah, so this is what would be termed as solid wall insulation, and it's slightly well, it's a lot more complex, and there's a much higher cost associated to it. It can be eligible under the scheme. However, what we found generally is that the £5,000 voucher might only cover about a third or a quarter of the actual total cost. It's a quite expensive measure. However, you know, we again have our own products to deal with solid walls, and the different kind of finishes and renders do generally have a really good aesthetical kind of quality to them, and it's definitely something that we can look at. It might be outside of this specific kind of group or this scheme, but you know, it's definitely something we can try and help with, and Colin and his team can definitely, you know, come do a survey and give you an idea of what would be involved in the costs, and you know, what we can get from the government Green Homes grants. But yeah, it's a slightly different measure than cavity.
Sorry, I've lost the chat window. All right. So someone else says, my home is timber framed. I have heard that this is not suitable for wall insulation. Is this correct?
Correct. You cannot retrofit cavity wall insulation into a timber frame property.
Sorry, Louise. What if you already have cavity wall insulation, but a lot of the polystyrene balls have come out over the years?
So the first question we'd be asking is, how has that happened? Because we would anticipate this has probably been caused by some form of building work or replacement windows or doors. When bead insulation, polystyrene bead insulation, is injected as the insulant, it should be injected with an adhesive. So as it forms in the wall, it effectively bonds together and creates a new wall within the cavity, effectively, which is made of polystyrene. So on the original install, we'd be asking why it wasn't injected with adhesive? And if it was, how is it broken up to escape? Because there's no way it should escape by itself. So if there's evidence that there are voids within the cavity, depending on the type of polystyrene bead that's already been installed, we may well be able to inject more. However, you must be aware this will probably fall outside this scheme because the new injection of insulation will not qualify for a 25-year guarantee.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is also on cavity wall insulation. What type of insulation do you inject, beads or fibres, and what's the reason for one versus the other?
So we do both. So generally we will use bead insulation where we have an access problem getting to a particular wall. So the injection holes and the hoses used to inject the insulation for bead insulation are a lot slimmer than they would be for a fibre insulation. So we can manoeuvre them better around a property. So they are that is the most common cause why we use bead over fibre. Some people will prefer bead because there are less injection holes and the injection holes are smaller as well. And some people will prefer it because the U value on the bead insulation is slightly better than on the fibre insulation, but the fibre insulation is the cheaper product.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I have a question myself about cavity wall insulation that I'm going to say here because the next questions are not about cavity wall insulation anymore. How do you know if your house already has cavity wall insulation, other than going and digging out my survey results? Can I look at the walls and just be able to tell?
Yes. It depends when it was done because obviously the injection holes will weather over time. But if you look underneath a window, particularly on the ground floor, 2 brick courses down from the window, you should, if it's been injected, see round mortar holes in the mortar joints between the bricks.
My house has got rendering on. I won't be able to see.
So if it's rendered, you will see that there are round holes injected all the way around your property. Okay?
I think it's been rendered after it
was done.
Yeah. So I should have looked before it was rendered.
You should have looked before it was done. So anyway, there's no other way apart from us coming to test drill the wall. That's the only way.
Okay. Okay, so then the next question is, if we want to insulate to a high level to ensure a U value high enough to install a heat pump, can you do external wall insulation?
Yeah, so this would be similar to the previous question in terms of we can do external solid wall insulation, and again we have our own approved products to do that and quite a lot of experience in doing it also. Again, there's a much higher cost to external wall insulation, but it's definitely something we can survey and let you know the cost of it, and take it from there. So yeah, and our products have specific U values associated to them, and I think we have 2 types of products. So we can obviously work with you to make sure that where possible we are accessing or raising the U value to your required amount. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And does loft floor raising work form part of the eligible spending for the grant?
It doesn't. No, you can't get the government funding to pay for loft floor raising or boarding. But it's something that we can build into the quote and kind of give you a good price for it, essentially. But yeah, we can't really get funding for it, but we can do it at a cheap rate.
Okay, thank you. Does the initial survey have a cost? And if so, does this get credited back when the work is done?
Well, generally, we don't charge for surveys generally. If you've been contacted by any other installers about this scheme, you'll see that quite a few have actually started charging for surveys, but we, well, particularly for this scheme, we won't be charging, so no.
Okay, thank you. Does the grant cover social housing and private rented properties too? Presumably the landlord would need to agree, and do you have any advice for this situation?
Yeah, so both social housing and private landlords can apply. They'll apply on behalf of the property that's being rented out. There is discussions about doing multiple applications, particularly for social housing providers. That process hasn't really been detailed yet. So as soon as I hear more about that, I'll let you guys know. And but yeah, if it's a multiple application, I think it's something we can definitely help you guys with, if you need to. But essentially, yes, a landlord can apply for this for the properties they own.
Okay, thank you. Can you give a rough idea for the price of raising the loft boards, sort of on a meterage rate?
Colin?
Are we talking about just lifting, or are we talking about raising the joists? Because they're two different things. So I need to know which one we were referring to there.
Perhaps you could explain both and explain what you mean by both.
So lifting, there's existing loft boarding in the loft, so we could just lift that and then reuse it. Okay, so just a rough idea, that depending on the loft space, anything between £8 and £15 per square metre to do that. And to raise the joist and reboard, obviously that's a lot more. There's a lot more involved in that in terms of labour and so forth. So so first of all, we'd have to lift the existing boarding, then raise the existing joists, and then relay the boarding again. So that comes in generally around about £25 per square metre to do that sort of work. But again, that's dependent on the survey and on the loft space itself.
Okay, thank you. By the way, if any of these answers don't answer your question, please do unmute yourself and say so, or put in the chat if you want an extra clarification. So there's another question. This is about cavity wall insulation. So I think my cavities might have mortar waste at the bottom, especially in the corners. Is that a problem from a damp point of view? And if so, can you clear the waste before injecting the insulation?
So yes, it is a problem. What causes damp in cavity walls is something that's obstructing the insulation from flowing across. So that the area where there is rubble or muck within the cavity, that becomes a cold spot once you've insulated it. And that cold spot then transmits itself to either a condensation spot or a mold spot on the inner leaf of the house. Okay, so before we insulate, we would have to have that muck or rubble cleared from the cavity. It's not something that we would do. It really needs a general builder to be doing that, to take bricks out of the wall, to clear the rubble, and then reapply the bricks before we could come and insulate the cavity.
Okay, thank you very much. One more on loft conversions. So they ask, for a loft conversion, can you take off the plasterboard and add more insulation up against the roof?
So that will fall under what's called room in roof insulation. And again, it comes down to kind of accreditations and approvals and the systems that are used in the industry. And there's been a lot of quite kind of negative or fairly damaging installations of this kind of type of measure, because it's usually done not very well, and it's not really something that we generally do often. it's something that we can, if it's required, we can probably use the skills of a different network member who's got a bit more experience into it, because yeah, it's something that the scheme administrators are really kind of cracking down on, the room and roof installation. But essentially, yes, it's a removal of the plasterboards. It's additional, generally quilt installation and then reboarding. But I don't know if that will really fall under this project which we're trying to do. But again, it's something we can kind of look at separately potentially and see if we can help you out with that.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one final question on the chat, which is, can loft insulation cause condensation as the roof isn't allowed to breathe?
Well, the job of the surveyor is to ensure that there is adequate ventilation to circulate once it is insulated. So we will quote where necessary for additional ventilation to be added once the installation's been installed. So that's part of our surveying process to check that.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning that ventilation is really having a big focus on it for our industry at the moment, and the scheme administrators and the what's called Trustmark, the guys who are approving all the works, they will like to see additional ventilation questions being asked and evidence being taken during the survey, just to make sure that all the measures that are being installed, whether it's cavity wall installation or loft, making sure that ventilation is always taken into consideration over the duration of the product lifespan. So it's something that will definitely be there'll be a much higher focus on it for this scheme. So yeah.
Okay, so that's all the questions on the chat. We've had none come in on the email. Does anyone in the audience want to ask a question directly? If so, please turn your camera on and unmute yourself.
Can I ask a brief question just on, is it kind of rock wool or that sort of equivalent of insulation that you unravel between the rafters in the loft?
Yeah, essentially, it's a very similar product to that. Yeah.
Okay, and so and just to be clear, so if you've got some existing insulation, most likely to be say 150 millimetre, judging what Colin was saying, then basically top it up to 300 mils by using 150 mil of rock wool or the equivalent. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, so we'll wrap it up there. If you do have any further questions, you're welcome to email in on westberkscan@gmail.com. And Ed and Colin, could you just say a bit about if people are interested in the scheme and want to ask you guys to come and do a survey, can you just remind us what the process is for that, please?
Yeah, Colin, do you want to go through the process?
Yeah, by all means. So it will be a phone call or an email into the group. We will respond directly to the customer by calling back generally. We will arrange then a survey date, which is convenient, and then we'll come out and then start the process. As I say, if we're doing both cavity and loft insulation, we'll probably be at the house for about an hour or so to do what we need to do, and then we'll leave you in peace.
And to save us digging out the email and phone number, could you just put it in the chat for us?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that now. And it's probably worth mentioning that if you phone up the office, it's just best to make sure that you mention the Warmer Streets scheme, just so we can be sure to add you into that kind of group of the kind of discounted rates and that kind of thing. Colin, do you want to put the best email address as well? The phone number's in the chat.
Yeah, no problem.
Or if you want to maybe have a more direct phone number, I'll just put our Instagroup number.
No, that's fine. If everything can come through that telephone number, that's fine, and I'll add in the email address in a moment.
Yeah, there's also an inquiry form on our website, which I'm just going to put in the chat as well. You'll see if you follow the link in the middle of the page, there's a big box saying find out more about the government grants. and in there you can inquire and put in what you're interested in, and again maybe in the notes just attach the kind of just mention about the Warmer Streets project, and we'll put you into the same pot. So there's various ways of getting in contact or learning a bit more. I'll just put my direct email address in as well. If you have any kind of questions, or if you want me to kind of go through anything in a bit more detail, please do so. There you go. And yeah, and hopefully we can start doing some surveys and getting an idea of of costs associated in the process a little bit more, and then hopefully when the vouchers start getting issued around early November, we'll be in a really good place to kind of hit the ground running.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for all the information. That's very useful.
Not at all. Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining and spending your evening listening to us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you
very
very
much.
much. Really helpful.
Very much, guys. Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye then.
Thanks for organising.